Okay, guys, so we're doing really good. We're barreling forward here, and I gotta tell you, I mean, this is probably gonna drive you crazy. Um, but I have to tell you that this section that we're on now, this thing where the god talks to the king and talks about the advantages and disadvantages of writing, I think this is the most interesting part of the entire book. It's because of this that I gave it to you. And I know I made you read fucking 20 pages of this bullshit before we got here, but I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating because when you enter a college, all the professors tell you reading is fundamental, reading is so important. You got to read the book. Reading books is how you learn things. You're never going to be smart if you don't read books. Everybody says that all the time in a college, right? That's what the college is. You buy a textbook, you read books, you learn things from books. It's a huge part of school. I mean, also you attend lectures and you do homework and you write essays, but writing, right? You read books. That's written word. And you write essays. That's more written words. And the whole university system, colleges everywhere in the world are based off of this idea that you go to college and you study books. That's what the library is, right? The library is supposed to have a pile of books. Now we put our books online. But it's the same thing. You're supposed to read stacks and stacks of books to get smart. That's what I did. I basically read like a book a week. More than that probably because I also audiobooks. So I do read more than that. So I probably read, let's say 75 books a year, something like that. I read a lot. And sometimes I'm reading philosophy books, and sometimes I have audiobooks to play while I'm doing the dishes, and that's just like stupid fantasy shit with wizards or whatever, and space ships and dumb shit. And then I read serious philosophy or Shakespeare or whatever in my free time. But I read a lot. I read stacks and stacks of books. And here comes this crazy moment. This is why it's interesting to study old things. Because, see, in the world that I live in, I thought everybody had said my whole life reading books is the key to being smart. But if you go back to Plato 2,500 years ago, he thought books were bullshit. He thought they were tricking people into thinking they were smart. And he also thought they were really dangerous. He saw this is the craziest thing. Also, what makes it extra crazy is I am reading about this in a fucking book. It's a book by Plato. I just made us read. It's 20,000 words by Plato. And at the conclusion of the book, Socrates says, books are bad. That's nuts. It goes against everything I was taught in school. And that's why I think it's interesting. Because it's a complex argument about why writing is dangerous and why it's bad and why it tricks people. Let's go big picture for a second. I just want you to notice a larger issue in the whole thing. Notice how much time has been spent in this book on tricking people, right? Lysias and his speech about how you should marry somebody you're not in love with was part of a whole school called the Sophists that practiced rhetoric. And all of that is using words to trick people. And then Socrates spent the whole middle section of the book talking about how love is important and higher heavenly things are important. And he really ended that by talking about how, like, the quest after truth is what matters, right? You got to find true things. And you got to quest after these higher heavenly truths like justice. And he says the problem with Lysias and all of his buddies, the sophists who practice rhetoric, is they use words to trick people. And he says, and you have to use words to get at the truth. And then comes the craziest moment. Because Socrates says the other thing that tricks people. Because remember Lysias and the sophists who practice rhetoric? They're tricking people with words. Well, Socrates thinks there's another thing that tricks people with words. It's books. It's writing. He thinks writing, Lysias tricks people, the sophists trick people, rhetoric tricks people. They're all like used fucking car salesmen. They make you believe things that aren't true. And Socrates says that's exactly what books do. It's the same thing. And I think that's fucking fascinating. I think it's fascinating that anybody believed that, because my whole life writing was it's so important to read books and write things down. I gotta write essays, Jeff, get good grades. And here comes this guy saying it's bad. Also, this is crazy because this is 2,500 years ago, so that's interesting. The whole culture ignored him, went a different direction. Um, uh, and it's also doubly fascinating that where am I finding out about this? In a book. Plato wrote a book. Plato wrote a book about why books are bad? It's nuts. And yeah, that's why I think it's fun. So, all right, let's keep going and take a look at what's going on. Pretty good. Um, so, all right, that's the debate. Okay. Phaedrus says, yes, Socrates, you can easily invent tales of Egypt or any other country. So Phaedrus is a dope. Phaedrus thinks that's just cool that Socrates invented that whole mythology. He thinks Socrates is so great at telling stories. Phaedrus is an idiot. And then Socrates says, there was a tradition in the temple of Dodona that oaks first gave prophetic utterances, meaning trees. The men of old, unlike in their simplicity to young philosophy, deemed that if they heard the truth even from an oak or rock, it was enough for them. Whereas you seem to consider not whether a thing is or is not true, but who the speaker is and what country the tale comes. I acknowledge the justice of your rebuke, and I think that the Theban is right in his view about letters. So he basically says, Phaedrus is like, oh wow, this is so cool, learning, what this god in ancient Egypt says. And Socrates says, you're very silly. It doesn't matter where the ideas come from. What matters is, are they true or not? And he talks about ancient people who got ideas from trees and rocks who spoke. Again, more mythology. But he says, Phaedrus, you're so silly. Like, it doesn't, like, I know, because Socrates tells him this whole story about this ancient Egyptian god. And Socrates says, I don't even know if this is true. Because he doesn't care who said it. He just cares if it's true or not. He just wants to know if it will lead him to the truth. Obviously, the mythology isn't true. But if the ideas in the mythology are worth paying attention to, then you got something. And so he says, Phaedrus, you're being very silly caring about where the story comes from. What matters is the story going to help us get to the truth? And Socrates thinks that it is. So then he's ready to dig in and talk about the story. Again, story's not true, but Socrates thinks it can lead us to the truth. He would be a very simple person, quite a stranger to the oracles of Thamus or Ammon, who would leave in writing or receive in writing any art under the idea that the written word would be intelligible or certain. So he says, listen, it's a stranger to the oracles of Thamus or of Ammon, meaning people who never heard this story, they must be very simple. They must be very stupid to think that writing is intelligible or certain. He thinks that writing is trouble and it's not going to get you where you want to go. Or who deem that writing was it all better than knowledge and the recollection of the same matters? That is most true. So he says he says only stupid people who never heard this story about the Egyptian god. Stupid people think that writing is really important. He says everybody knows writing's not important. And that's crazy because nobody knows that today. Everybody's pro-writing. All your teachers tell you to write. They tell you to read. And Socrates is like, really, only stupid people care about writing and reading. This is nuts. But remember, he says it's not certain or intelligible. He says you can't trust writing. Remember, Socrates is on a quest for the truth, and his issue is that this isn't going to get you to the truth. So Socrates says here, all right. So he says, it must be a very stupid person who doesn't know this story, who would leave in writing or receive in writing, meaning somebody who would write something down or read a book under the idea that the written word would be intelligible or certain. You can't trust written words. Or who decided that writing was at all better than knowledge and recollection in the same matters? You can't trust writing, says Socrates, because that's what the king of Egypt said. And Phaedrus, who's a fucking idiot, just agrees with him all the time. I acknowledge the justice of... Oh, sorry. That is most true. Oh, thanks a lot, Phaedrus. I cannot help feeling, Phaedrus, that writing is unfortunately like painting. Okay, this section, this little bit here is where we're going to end for the day. I'm going to do one more video after this. But he says, I can't help in this feeling, Phaedrus, that writing is unfortunately like painting. For the creation of the painter have the attitude of life, and yet, if you ask them a question, they preserve a solemn silence. And the same may be said of speeches, meaning written speeches. You would imagine they had intelligence, but if you want to know anything and put a question to one of them, the speaker always gives one unvarying answer. And when they have been once written down, they are tumbled about anywhere among those who may or may not understand them, and know not to whom they should reply, know not to whom they should reply, to whom not. And if they are maltreated or abused, maybe treated badly, they have no parent to protect them, and they cannot protect or defend themselves. So that is the section. The final video in the series will be about that, and I will see you guys in that video, and we will wrap up for the day. And guys, we're really barreling through on page 22. We got half of page 22. We got all of page 23. We got half of page 24, and we're fucking done with this. Amazing.